Meanwhile, the leader of the hugely popular progressive opposition party in Thailand has been suspended from his parliament duties by the Constitutional Court hours before a critical vote that will determine his chance to become the country's next prime minister. Anisa de Guzman reports.
Move Forward Party leader Pita Limjanurat has been suspended from his role as an elected member of the House of Representatives by the Constitutional Court on Wednesday, causing him to walk out from the chamber in front of his fellow lawmakers earlier today. The court's decision came after accepting a case that Pita was unqualified to run in May's election due to his ownership of shares in the now-defunct media company ITV Public Company Limited. The judges unanimously agreed to accept the case and suspend him from his parliament duties until the ruling is delivered. The court instructed the Move Forward Party leader to provide his explanation within 15 days of receiving a copy of the ruling. By Wednesday afternoon, Pita left the chamber after the court's suspension order had arrived. The 42-year-old raised his fist in the air as he left the assembly floor. Fellow lawmakers gave him a round of applause, while the parliament president thanked him for respecting the rules. A political activist who filed the complaint in May pointed out that Pita's media shares violated the constitution, and his assets were not declared when he assumed the post of MP in May 2019. Pita has argued the 42,000 shares were part of his late father's estate, and he was just assigned as manager of the family heritage, while the title had since been transferred to relatives. The court suspension, however, does not prevent the MFP leader from being nominated as prime minister. A spokesman for the U.S. Department of State earlier this week said that Washington is monitoring the post-election developments in Thailand and expressed concern about the legal system in the Southeast Asian nation. Di siya Anisa de Guzman, Drangan Chakontet Mahanapon, SMNI News, Pratat Thai. Sawadee.
Amid the deteriorating ties between China and the United States, former U.S. Secretary of State and former U.S. National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger visits China and recently met with senior Chinese diplomat Wang Yi. Our partner from CGTN, Dong Shu, will give us an update on this live from Beijing, China. Good evening, Dong Shu. Thank you for joining us on Newsline World here on SMNI.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, good evening. Can you tell us more about the meeting between Henry Kissinger and Wang Yi?
Well, sure. Well, the meeting comes at a time when both China and the United States were trying to re-establish the high-level contacts due to the alleged surveillance balloon incident earlier in this February. Now we've seen, we've seen a couple of American high-level officials visited Beijing that include the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, as well as the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Also, John Kerry, the presidential envoy for climate change, is also wrapping up his trip today in Beijing. Well, and this is obviously not the first time Wang Yi and Kissinger has met face in face. Wang referring to Kissinger as an old friend, a term that basically implies high praise in Chinese diplomacy. Well, Wang commended the former U.S. diplomat for playing an irreplaceable role in enhancing mutual understanding between the two countries. And Wang said the United States needs a Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom in its policies towards China, and Nixon-style political courage. As we know, Kissinger served as the U.S. State Secretary and National Security Advisor in the administration of the Presidents Richard Nixon as well as Gerald Ford. And Wang told Kissinger that it would be impossible to try to reform China, and even more impossible to encircle and contain China. Very strong position coming out from Chinese side, and also specifically on Taiwan. Wang said that the U.S. should distance itself from Taiwan independence separatist activities if it hopes for a stability across the Taiwan Straits. And Kissinger reportedly told one that maintaining stable relations between the United States and China concerns the world peace, stability, and the well-being of mankind. So no matter how difficult it is, both sides should treat each other as equals, maintain contact, and it is unacceptable to try to isolate or the one or the other.
Henry Kissinger played a significant role in shaping the relationship between China and the United States. But how can he help mend the two countries' deteriorating relations in our time today?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Kissinger served as the U.S. State Secretary and National Security Advisor in the administration of Presidents Richard Nixon as well as Gerald Ford. He obviously played a key diplomatic role in the normalization of relations between Washington and Beijing back in the 1970s, and he had visited Beijing. He has visited China regularly since leaving office. You know, he's 100 years old, and I counted he's had visited China probably over a lot of times. You know, so people see him as both. I think people in both China and the United States see him as a brilliant strategist who made tough but necessary decisions to advance American interests in a complex world. Well, in times of today, I think it's always good to have him as a rational and positive voices and a role to play in better enhancing the bilateral relations between China and the United States.
A report from CCTV, and I quote, "One China was the solemn commitment made by the United States in the Shanghai Communique," Kissinger said, adding that he believes the U.S. will not waver or backtrack on that promise. However, recent actions taken by the United States seem to contradict this. Can you tell us what are some of the reactions of Beijing officials regarding this matter?
Well, to start with, I want to say, Taiwan is what the Chinese officials have repeatedly said, the core of the core interests of Chinese government and the red lines that shouldn't be crossed when dealing with China. Well, these are the messages that Chinese diplomats and Chinese officials have been constantly telling the world. So to cooperate with China, any country should respect the one China principle. That's the basis when dealing with China. So, well, let me give you an example. Last year when the then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, China dispatched warships and military aircraft to all sides of the island to strongly oppose such behaviors, and even had to cut off climate talks with the United States. So these are some of the impacts if countries had, violates the one China principle.
All right, Nongxi. Meanwhile, on different topic, on Monday, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune visited China and met with President Xi Jinping the following day. For the knowledge of our international viewers, how did the meeting between the two presidents go?
Well, I think the meeting went well overall. We've seen concrete results coming out from these high-level talks. The two sides had assigned bilateral cooperation in various fields, as well as a joint statement, and the two agreed to expand their cooperation in fields like technology sectors, and other and other sectors as well. Well, this is President Tebboune's first visit to Beijing since coming to power in 2019, and follows his meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow last month. He said that China is Algeria's most important friend and partner, and thanks to China's long-standing valuable support to Algeria, as well at the same time, Algeria firmly supports China's position on core interests or core issues such as Taiwan and Xinjiang-related issues, and is willing to actively participate in the constructions of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which actually marks the 10th anniversary this year. And also the bilateral ties, the historic ties between the two countries goes way back. When in 1955, the then Chinese foreign minister, or the Chinese premier, Zhou Enlai, encountered Algeria's nationalist delegation of the what called National Liberation Front at the Bandung Conference of African and Asian States. The very well-known conference that had basically united developing countries. By then, China was subsequently the first non-Arab country to recognize Algeria when it gained independence from France in 1962. Now that 6 decades have passed, the two still kept a very close contact and also a very close cooperation in many fields. And as I mentioned earlier, Algeria is also first African countries to sign up and supported China's Belt and Road Initiative. So we can see the friendship, the cooperation between the two have grown stronger by times.
All right, thank you so much, Dong Xue, our CGTN reporter live from Beijing, China.